The general's jovial expression evaporated the moment his aide leaned in to whisper. The entire ballroom, filled with the crisp uniforms and polite chatter of the military elite, seemed to hold its breath. The general's face, moments before wreathed in a proud smile for my sister, turned to stone as he glanced at the glowing screen of a secure phone. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the audience before landing on the stage. His voice, when it came, was stripped of all warmth. It was the voice of pure command. "Halt the ceremony," he ordered, the words cutting through the silence. "We have an authenticated killswitch authority activation from SOCOM C and C." A wave of confused, nervous murmurs rippled through the officers. My sister, Jessica, stood there, her own perfect smile frozen in place, a mask of utter bewilderment. The general leaned toward his aide, his question a low growl that carried in the tense quiet. "Who is the activating authority?" The aide didn't hesitate, his voice ringing with chilling clarity. "Major Ava Rostova, sir." Call sign, Echo. Of course, 12 minutes earlier, I was just Eva. I was the late arrival, slipping into the Fort Belvoir Officers Club with my husband, David, a man whose quiet solidarity was the only anchor I needed. We were an understated island in a sea of dress blues and perfectly polished metals. My sister Jessica, the family's golden child who wore her ambition like a second uniform, was the brilliant sun at the center of this universe. Her eyes found us, and that familiar condescending smirk I'd known my whole life spread across her face. "Look who finally showed up, the useless soldier," she announced, her voice pitched for maximum audience impact. The laughter from her admirers was polite but sharp, each chuckle a tiny needle of confirmation. To them, to everyone, this was the narrative. Jessica, the star, and Eva, the washed-out disappointment, shuffling papers in a forgotten corner of the Pentagon. The insult landed, not with a hot sting of surprise, but with the heavy, familiar thud of one more stone being dropped onto a scale already weighted against me. I didn't just hear her words. I saw the missed phone calls on my birthday, the condescending pats on the head when I tried to explain my work, the decade of being treated like a footnote in my own family's story. All of it was there, in that one sneering nickname, but my face remained a calm, placid lake. Years of compartmentalizing, of living behind a carefully constructed wall, had taught me this stillness. I met her smug gaze and leaned into David, whispering the 5 words that were our prearranged signal for the unthinkable. "It's happening. Let's go." His jaw was tight, a mask of cold fury he reserved only for injustices against me, but he simply gave a single sharp nod. We turned in unison and walked out of that crowded room without a word, leaving a wake of confused glances and the echo of my sister's laughter behind us. My sister thought she'd just scored another public victory, reinforcing the family narrative of her as the star and me as the failure. She had no idea her promotion ceremony was taking place in a secure facility that fell under my directorate's OPSEC umbrella, or that her condescending words had just met the criteria for a Level 1 command integrity review. To understand the call I made in the parking lot, you have to understand the 2 lives I was forced to live. To truly understand the fracture in my family, you have to go back 2 years, to a Christmas that was, in every way, exactly like all the ones that came before it. The house was filled with the scent of pine and roasting turkey, a perfect picture of holiday warmth. At the head of the table sat my father, Colonel Robert Rostova, a retired infantry officer, more in love with the public image of a decorated military family than with the people who comprised it. He lived his life for the reflection he saw in other people's eyes, a reflection of strength, legacy, and unwavering success. His pride was a tangible thing, a suffocating blanket he draped over all of us. He raised his glass, the crystal catching the light. "A toast," he announced, his voice booming with performative pride. "To my daughter, Jessica, on her recent commendation for the Armed Forces Media Relations Award. She's out there every day, shaping the narrative, fighting the good fight where the public can see it." Everyone cheered as Jessica, glowing under the praise, dipped her head in a display of faux humility. It was for a series of press releases, well written certainly, but hardly the tip of any spear. I watched the scene, a familiar ache settling in my chest. It was the ache of invisibility, of knowing your turn will never come. After the applause died down, my mother gave me an encouraging nudge. So, like I did every year, I tried. "That's amazing, Jess," I said, my voice quiet. "I actually have some news too. I was just selected for a fellowship at the National Security Agency." A silence fell over the table. It wasn't a hostile silence. It was worse. It was a blank, dismissive quiet. My father gave me a slow, placating pat on the arm, the kind you give a child who has just shown you a drawing of a lopsided house. "That's nice, dear," he said, his eyes already drifting back to Jessica. "More computer work? Sounds very safe. Just try to stay out of trouble. Your sister is the real tip of the spear in this family." That was always the word. Safe. I was the safe one. The disappointing one. The useless soldier. A nickname they'd unofficially given me after I had to drop out of airborne school. The story they told themselves, and everyone else, was that I'd washed out from a simple training accident. They saw it as my ultimate failure. The moment I proved I wasn't made of the same stuff as them. They imagined I'd taken some low-level pity job in logistics, a desk-bound creature of spreadsheets and supply requests. They had no idea the accident was a cover story for injuries sustained during a selection course so classified, its name couldn't be uttered in an unshielded room. They didn't know the desk I sat at was at the very center of the storm. My real world had no windows. It was a sensitive, compartmented information facility, a SCIF, buried deep inside MacDill Air Force Base. Here, I wasn't Eva. I was Echo. The air hummed with the sound of servers and industrial-grade cooling, a constant low thrum against a backdrop of absolute silence. My title was Lead Planner for the Directorate of Special Projects, and my current task was codenamed Operation Medusa's Gaze, a high-stakes counterintelligence dragnet targeting a hostile state's spy network. The only light came from a wraparound bank of screens displaying complex data streams, satellite uplinks, and encrypted communications from 3 different continents. My family saw me working with computers. They just had the scale wrong by a factor of 1 billion. A young analyst to my left, a brilliant kid from MIT, flagged an anomaly. "Ma'am, we have a digital signature pinging a dormant server in Ankara. It looks like a mistake on their part." "Sloppy?" I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the raw data. The family Christmas dinner felt 1,000,000 miles away. Here, there were no personalities, no favorites, only patterns. The ping wasn't sloppy. It was too sloppy. It was bait, designed to make us focus on the server while the real breach happened somewhere else entirely. It was a sophisticated digital feint, and we were seconds away from walking right into it. "Negative," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. "That's a digital ghost. They're trying to draw our eyes left, kill the Ankara link, and initiate contingency blackout on all assets in the Eastern European theater." Now, there was a half-second of hesitation from the analyst. I was overriding standard protocol. "Execute," I commanded, my tone leaving no room for debate. He typed furiously, and across the main screen, 12 critical assets, names of real people in the field, blinked from red to a secure cloaked green. We had just saved them from being compromised, perhaps worse. In the doorway, I saw my commanding officer, General Marcus Thorne, a man who had seen too much war to be impressed by anything but raw competence. He'd been watching the whole time. He didn't speak. He just gave me a single sharp nod, a gesture of profound respect that was worth more to me than 1,000 of my father's empty toasts. That silent nod was the only approval I ever needed, but it was one I could never take home with me. The only person who understood the crushing weight of that duality was my husband. David, an ex-CIA case officer who now consulted on the very security systems my unit was often tasked to break, was the keeper of my secrets. Later that night, long after the disastrous Christmas dinner, we sat in the quiet of our living room. He didn't ask, "How was your day?" He knew I couldn't answer that. Instead, he looked at me, his gaze steady and knowing, and asked the question he always did after a particularly draining period. "Was the signal-to-noise ratio high today?" he asked softly. The signal, the mission, the truth, the work that mattered, the noise, the family, the lies, the crushing weight of their disappointment. I leaned my head against his shoulder and finally let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. The noise was almost deafening, I whispered. But the signal is still clear. For years, I built a wall between my worlds. I let them believe the narrative because OPSEC demanded it. But they didn't just disrespect me, they disrespected the very concept of the quiet professional. They only understood the theater of power. So I decided it was time to give them a front row seat. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the sound of David's knuckles turning white as he gripped the steering wheel. His anger was a hot, radiating thing, a silent testament to his loyalty. But I felt nothing of the sort. The years of simmering resentment had cooled into something hard and sharp, like ice. I wasn't emotional. I was operational. I was finally looking at a problem in my personal life the way I would at work, as a vulnerability in the system that needed to be patched. It wasn't just an insult, David, I said, my voice unnervingly steady. That's what they'll never understand. I laid it out for him, not as a wounded sister, but as a senior field grade officer making an assessment. Jessica's open contempt for another officer in a public, command-sponsored setting is a direct violation of UCMJ Article 133, conduct unbecoming an officer. She demonstrated a catastrophic lack of situational awareness and judgment. With the top-secret clearance her promotion grants her, she's a security liability. I looked out at the dark parking lot. This wasn't revenge. It was a for-cause security review. My authority as Echo wasn't just about directing assets in the field. It came with oversight on security protocols for high-level events on sensitive military installations, a responsibility designed to prevent breaches. Part of that responsibility was a tool of last resort, a rarely used power called the killswitch authority. It was designed for this exact scenario, when an officer displays behavior that poses a potential risk to command integrity or security. Their advancement can be halted for immediate review. Jessica, with her arrogance and carelessness, had just handed me the perfect textbook justification to use it. She had mistaken my silence for weakness, never imagining I had the power to mute her entire world. I pulled out my secure phone, a heavy black device that didn't have games or social media. It had a direct line to the heart of the United States warfighting apparatus. I navigated to a secure directory and dialed the 24/7 duty officer at the JSOC command center. When he answered, the voice that came out of my mouth wasn't Eva's. It was Echo's, clipped, professional, and devoid of all emotion. This is Major Rostova, call sign Echo, authentication code 979er Delta. I'm activating killswitch authority for event identifier 7-1-4 at Fort Belvoir. Justification, command integrity review, potential violation of UCMJ Article 133 by the honoree. Please route the formal review request to General Thorne's office. Acknowledge. There was a brief, silent pause on the other end, then a simple, acknowledged, Echo? I replied, thank you. Echo out, and ended the call. The system was built to neutralize external threats. But it had procedures for internal ones too. My sister had just spent a decade building her career for this one moment. It took me 90 seconds in a parking lot to put it all on hold. I wasn't in the room when the world tilted on its axis, but the story was relayed to me later by so many different sources that I can see it in my mind's eye as if I had a front row seat. Each account painted the same vivid picture of controlled chaos descending upon the Fort Belvoir Officers Club. The air, once filled with polite applause and celebratory murmurs, was now thick with a tense, confused silence. My sister Jessica was a statue on the stage, her face a porcelain mask of rage and utter humiliation. The new captain's insignia still sitting on a velvet pillow beside her, unpinned. This was supposed to be her moment of triumph, the culmination of her life's ambition. And then there was my father. I was told he reacted exactly as I knew he would, with pure, unfiltered indignation. He believed this was all just some colossal bureaucratic error, a clerical mistake that his rank and his reputation could easily bulldoze. He started marching toward the stage, his chest puffed out, ready to demand an explanation and put a stop to this nonsense. He was the colonel, after all, and he was used to the world bending to his will. He would not have his family's perfect day ruined by some administrative foul-up. He never made it to the stage. The presiding general, the man who only moments before had been Jessica's champion, held up a single steady hand. It was not a request. It was a silent command that stopped my father dead in his tracks. "Colonel." The general's voice was like iron, sharp and unyielding, echoing through the microphone. "Stand down." The two words hung in the air, a public stripping of my father's assumed authority. For the first time in his life, in a room full of his peers, he was not the one in charge. The general then turned his attention back to the stunned audience. "For clarity," he announced, "a killswitch activation is a non-negotiable directive from Special Operations Command. It requires the immediate suspension of all proceedings pending a full security review by the activating authorities command." He let the words sink in. Special Operations Command, SOCOM. To the civilians in the room, it might have meant little. But to this audience, to the colonels, majors, and captains who made up my family's world, it was a name spoken with a kind of hushed reverence. It was the parent command for the military's most elite, most secretive units. This was no longer about a promotion. This was a matter of national security. A captain from the general staff, his face grim, then approached the microphone, holding a printout from the secure message. "Sir, we have confirmation," he said. "The formal review has been filed. The activating officer is Major Ava Rostova." He paused, and in that brief silence, I can only imagine my father's confusion turning to smug certainty. "Ava? My Eva? The useless one? This really is a mistake." But the aide wasn't finished. Directorate of Special Projects, Joint Special Operations Command. If SOCOM was a name spoken in reverence, JSOC was a name that was barely whispered at all. It was the home of the secret squirrels, the shadow warriors, the ghosts who moved between worlds to execute the nation's most sensitive and dangerous missions, the legends. In that room, a wave of understanding washed over the uniformed guests. It was a quiet, stunning ripple of exchanged glances, of dawning comprehension. They knew what that unit designation meant. It meant that the useless soldier, the family failure, the quiet paper pusher, was one of them. She was the real tip of the spear. I was told Jessica's face simply collapsed. The carefully constructed mask of the golden child shattered, revealing the raw, ugly shock beneath. Her boring desk job, her quiet life, the things Jessica had mocked for years, it was all a cover for a career so significant, so far beyond her own, that she couldn't even begin to comprehend its scope. Her entire life's narrative, built on being the more successful, more important daughter, had just been publicly and irrevocably debunked. But the true devastation was reserved for my father. As the aide's words echoed in the room, the color drained from his face. He stood frozen, his blustering anger replaced by a horrifying, silent clarity. I can see him in my mind, his internal ledger spinning backward at dizzying speed. Every dismissive comment, "More computer work, dear?" Every condescending pat on the head, every time he had looked at me with disappointment and called me a failure. He was connecting the dots, realizing that the daughter he had dismissed as a footnote was the author of a story he wasn't even cleared to read. He looked from his shattered daughter on the stage to the empty doorway I had walked through, and the entire foundation of his worldview, of his family's hierarchy, turned to dust. The final blow, they said, was the looks on the faces of his peers. It wasn't anger or confusion. It was something far worse. It was pity. The quiet, knowing contempt for a man so blinded by his own arrogance he couldn't recognize the diamond right in front of him. My sister had always measured success by the applause of a crowd. In that moment, her career was undone by the power of a single name whispered in silence. While my family's world was imploding in a ballroom of dress uniforms and shattered pride, David and I were miles away, sitting in a quiet, all-night diner. The vinyl on the booth was cracked, and the coffee was bitter, but it felt like the most peaceful place on earth. It was a pocket of calm on the other side of the storm I had just unleashed. My secure phone buzzed on the table, a stark black rectangle against the checkered pattern. It wasn't a call, but a short, encrypted message from a number I knew by heart, General Thorne's. I opened it. The text was brief, devoid of emotion, Yet it was everything. Echo, Instagram confirms blatant protocol violations. Review will be thorough. Your judgment was sound. Good call. I read the words twice, then slid the phone across the table to David. He scanned the message, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face for the first time that night. He didn't say anything. He just reached across the table and covered my hand with his. In his touch, I felt the only validation that ever truly mattered. It wasn't the applause of a crowd or the hollow praise of a father desperate to maintain a facade. It was the quiet, unwavering respect of someone who knew the whole truth, who had seen both of my worlds, and who stood by me in the silence between them. That was my victory. A year can change everything. It can turn a quiet major into a confident commander. The sterile, windowless skiff was replaced by the sprawling, state-of-the-art JSOC Cyber Operations Center. I stood on a raised platform before a massive holographic map of the world, data streams and satellite feeds pulsing like veins across its surface. The rank on my collar was no longer a gold oak leaf, but a silver one. And I was no longer just Echo, the lead planner. I was Lieutenant Colonel Eva Rostova, commander of the newly formed Task Force Chimera, and I was briefing the Secretary of Defense on a developing global crisis. The room was filled with the most powerful figures in the defense establishment, but my voice never wavered. I moved through threat assessments, asset deployments, and contingency plans with a quiet authority that I no longer had to fake. This was my domain. I wasn't the useless soldier here. I was the last line of defense. When I finished, the Secretary of Defense looked at me, his expression grim but impressed. "Colonel," he said, "proceed as briefed. You have my full confidence." There were no condescending pats on the arm, no dismissive remarks about computer work. There was only the weight of immense responsibility, fully and deservedly given. After the dignitaries filed out, my team gathered around me. This was my new family, a tribe forged not by blood, but by pressure, competence, and an unspoken trust that ran deeper than any DNA. There was no fawning, no superficial praise. They were operators and analysts at the highest level. "Good brief, Echo," my lead intel officer said, his eyes already on the data board. "The threat matrix is locked in," my comm sergeant gave a sharp nod. "We're ready to execute on your order." This was their language, the language of respect earned through shared struggle and proven expertise. This was where I belonged. Later that evening, in the quiet of my new office overlooking the command floor, an email notification popped up on my screen. The sender's name made my stomach clench for just a moment, a phantom limb of a pain I no longer felt. It was from my father. The subject line was just my name, Eva. I hesitated for a second, then clicked it open. It was exactly what I expected. A rambling, broken mess of an apology, interwoven with desperation. He wrote about Jessica, about how the formal reprimand had ended her career. She'd been relegated to a dead-end logistics post in the middle of nowhere, a pariah among her peers. Then came the part that showed he had learned nothing. He begged me to fix it. He asked me to use my influence, to make a call, to undo the consequences of her own actions. He still saw my authority not as something I had earned, but as a tool to be used for his benefit, to restore his perfect family picture. He still saw me as a means to an end. I read the entire email, from the pathetic pleas to the self-pitying sign-off, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not triumph, not even sadness. Just a profound and quiet sense of finality. The ledger was balanced. The war was over. I moved my cursor over the message, over the last ghost of my old life, and I clicked delete. I turned my chair back toward the glowing world map, back to my work, my peace finally and completely my own. My family believed a soldier's worth was measured in parades and public promotions. I learned true strength is the authority you wield when no one is watching. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.